All right, so now we're getting into the meat of our lecture series, and we're going to talk about our three lines of defense, how our bodies defend ourselves against pathogens. All right, so let's get into it. Basically, you want to be able to, by the end of this, outline the three levels of protection against pathogens. This photo, by the way, is something called phagocytosis. It's PHAGOCYTOSIS, phagocytosis, and yeah, so it's pretty cool. That's down the road. We'll get there. All right, first line of defense. Basically, these are barriers that prevent entry of pathogens to our body. Now, these can be both physical and chemical, and we've got a list of a bunch of them here. So we've got lysosome, which is something in our tears and other secretions, and that's an enzyme that breaks down bacterial cells. We've got cilia, so nose hairs, which sort of like hair-like structures that pull particles out, prevent it from getting down. Mucus lining traps it. We've got skin, which acts as a barrier, as well as acid on our skin, which acts as a chemical barrier. We've got a rapid pH change, so it goes from really low pH on acid in the stomach to a high pH here. You've got this stuff called, so that, if you eat a bacteria that likes a good acid, by the time it hits your duodenum, it's going to die anyway. Generally, you've got normal flora. That means flora in this case means bacteria. So you've got normal bacteria that lives in your stomach, and your urinary tract is flushed out because with urine constantly. Okay, so it's non-specific. That means it defends against everything. It doesn't look for a certain thing to attack. A combination of physical and chemical barriers, and it prevents foreign agents penetrating the outer layer of the body. And that actual sentence is quite important. Foreign agent. This means it could be it doesn't have to be a bacteria. It could be an allergen, so something that gives you an allergic reaction. All right. So the second line of defense, which is the non-specific immune cells. This is real. By the way, this is not an animation. It's an animated GIF, but it's not animation. So you've got leukocytes, or white blood cells, that circulate throughout the body. Now, if a pathogen is able to make it through the first line of defense, these guys come in and try and kill it. Okay, so they're non-specific and they attack any foreign object that enters the body. And you can see it doing it just here. And this is what we call phagocytosis. So your leukocytes, they're mobile, they move around the bloodstream and tissues, and they look for foreign agents and they smash them. So they're also preventative. These will flood injured areas. This is what we call inflammation, and you'll see it as swelling. So if you hurt your knee and it swells up, that's your immune system trying to prevent you, just in case a bacteria or something's going there. The injury might have carried in some form of pathogen. So they're generally called macrophages, which are really large phagocytes. Now the phagocyte, just here, that's the cell which is doing this. And these are, I would say red blood cells, but I could be wrong, that it's moving around and attacking it. So they're highly mobile, and they engulf the pathogen and break it down. Digestion, just like you breaking your food down, that's what it's doing. It's breaking it down. And this is called phagocytosis, as we've mentioned. It's pretty rad. All right. So these are the type of white blood cells you have. We're not going to go into these too much, but it's essentially these guys. All right. Granulocytes and agranulocytes. All that means is when you look at them under a microscope, these guys look like they've got little grains in them. And if we go back here, that would be a granulocyte. And these ones, they look clear. Now this one here, your lymphocyte, that's useful in the specific immune response, which is the next one. Okay, well first we've got the inflammation one. So you have an injury, boom, a wound comes in, and bacteria can come in and whatever stabs you. So your body releases all the phagocytes, or the white blood cells, into the area. It swells up. Histamine means that's what causes the swelling. and it all fills up, and hopefully they mop up the bacteria as it gets there. And that's why your knee swells if you hurt it, or anywhere else swells if you hurt it. Okay, so the third line of defense is the specific immune response. All right, so the specific immune response, and we're going to go into this in more detail in the next video, is activated by a prolonged presence of foreign bodies. So the non-specific immune response has not been able to kill off whatever it is that's making you sick, and these are called antigens. All right. So what an antigen actually is a protein marker on the outside of the cell, virus, whatever, and that are used to identify them. Every cell has proteins on it that can be used to identify it. If it's an antigen that is from a cell in your body, all right, that's called a self-antigen, and an antigen from outside of your body, that's called a non-self antigen. All right. So, as I said, so the body, it identifies its own, and it doesn't attack them. It's not a big deal. But if it identifies a non-self antigen, an immune response happens. So, antibodies are produced that inactivate the antigens. So here you've got this protein on the outside of your cell here, or the pathogen. The body produces an opposite version of it, like a negative to it, that fits on it perfectly, and that will inactivate the antigen. So if it's an antigen, so if it's a protein on the outside that has a super important function for that cell, that might be enough to stop it. That might be enough to kill it. But just in case, the body, its white blood cells also target antigens for distraction. So this will then, phagocytosis will happen afterwards if this isn't enough. So with these white blood cells with antibodies, all right, so back up a step. So once the antibody is on the outside of the cell, white blood cells will attack it. Now, the antibodies themselves are produced by a different type of white blood cell, and the white blood cell will produce a bunch of antibodies and circulate in your system for sometimes a few weeks, for sometimes years and years, in case of a future attack. So if the virus comes back in, the white blood cells are already there with the antibodies, they'll recognize it and they'll attack it. And these are what we call memory cells. So you have immunity. A good example of this is glandular fever or Epstein-Barr virus. You really only get this once, and it can knock you around. If you're ever exposed to it again, though, you'll get sick for a few days, and you'll get really sick for a few days. But that's your immune system responding to the virus, trying to fight it off. But you don't get sick again for weeks and weeks and weeks like you did the first time. All right. So, as we said, antibodies are the chemical negative of the antigens, and they basically allow the white blood cells to bind to it, and it makes it easier to stick to it, and they are specific to every single pathogen. We'll get to what that means for downsides in a minute, or in the next lecture. So yeah, so that's it. That was a big one, and it was pretty complicated, so you might need to go back over it again. All right, see you in class.